Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Dentists Who Invest podcast. I have been looking forward to this episode today because it's one I've been meaning to do for an absolute while, and I can't believe it took until episode 107, 108, whatever this episode will be whenever we release it. This episode is on maternity pay, how the system looks, how it works, and how you can get the most from it. And I have sat opposite me the lovely Sarah Beskeen, who is here to explain anything and everything maternity pay in the NHS, the ins, the outs, and everything that we should know, we should have easily made available to us, but we don't. Sarah, how are you today?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. Yeah, all good.
Wonderful. Whereabouts in the world are you talking to us from, Sarah?
So I'm talking from just outside Bath, so southwest,
Bath.
in
Okay.
my practice. Not
Oh,
my
look,
practice.
very
In my
beautiful.
associate practice, yeah. So
Very beautiful. And top marks to Sarah because she's literally just finished extracting a tooth before she jumped on the airwaves with myself. So I think that she deserves extra plaudits for that because I'm sure it's been a long day in work as well. And you're still here to give us more. So thank you so much for that, Sarah.
no
So,
props.
Sarah, am I right in saying that you're an associate or a practice owner?
So I'm an associate.
Ah,
So I've been at
okay.
this practice for about 12 years now. So
And for those that don't know you, maybe it might be nice if we had a little bit of background on.
um bye. Sorry. Right. So yeah, so I qualified 2007 and did my FD year and then moved over this direction. And then I have since then been on 2 maternity leaves. And I just realized when I was on maternity leave, I actually didn't really know how much money I was going to get, how long I was going to get it for, how I could find out how much money I was going to get, and even where to search or who to ask. And it was one of those things where it's quite hard to ask your boss, what's the maternity pay going to be like? Because immediately they're like, oh, you're going on maternity leave. And you don't necessarily, if you're planning mortgage wise, all that sort of thing, you actually don't want to say, oh, we might have a baby one day. What will the situation be? So when I went on my first maternity leave, in fact, when I came back from my second maternity leave, I was noticing quite a few people putting up questions on the different Facebook groups about maternity pay. And I was thinking, surely there must be someone that knows the answer to all this, but nobody seemed to be knowing it. So I set up a Facebook group called dental bumps, basically to try and put the information in one area so that if somebody asked a question on Facebook, I could be like, hey, just look at this group. I've put the information there. And then I just thought maybe like 20 people might be interested. And then I think over time we've got probably around like 1,700 people that have kind of been on there and kind of asking questions quite regularly. And quite a lot of the people there they still are on there kind of guiding other people. So I just realized there was a bit of a gap in knowledge and where to find it. So it's just a place where I can pinpoint. So as a result of trying to find out it for myself, I worked out where to find it all out. And then that's why I've got the group to kind of share the information with other people and hopefully so that they can answer questions before they have to be completely lost.
That's awesome. And this is the part of the reason this podcast as well, so that this information can be disseminated. Because I don't know if is there anything like that on your group? Is there any sort of videos or audio files which describe these sorts of things? The reason that I ask is that you can have all the black and white T's and C's you want. They're not super accessible. What makes them way more tangible and useful is when you have a audio form. It's way more accessible and easy to listen to. I'm just wondering, is this sort of stuff out there already?
Not that I know of. So basically, at the minute, there's like NHS ask us kind of basically you can go around in circles asking questions on the NHS because it pinpoints you to then a form that doesn't open it. So there's not that useful resources, and there's certainly not any like audio. Just listen to it and it will sort the problem out. You can end up going around the houses a little bit finding information, but I've posted up things like the links that people need to follow for like the forms and all the stuff like that. But yeah, there's nothing that I know of in the kind of audible format.
Well, if my NHS pension podcast is anything to go by, yeah, 100%. If that previous podcast is anything to go by, the NHS pension one, there's so many flipping downloads on that podcast. People tend to message me quite a lot and say, wow, why did it take until flipping 2021 for that
Yeah.
information to be accessible in that form? And I feel, reading between the lines or guessing, getting a bit ahead of myself, that this podcast will be something similar. So let's go ahead and delve straight in. Maternity leave. Can you just give us from a very high level what sort of support is available for those mums who will be on the NHS when they arrive close to their maternity pay time?
So on the NHS, this is in England and Wales, I think is very similar. You get maternity leave, which is from the NHS, which is based on your net pensionable earnings, and you also get maternity allowance, which is the Department of Work and Pensions sum, which is based on being self-employed, which is about £250 a month. Now, the NHS one you get for 26 weeks, and the maternity allowance, which is the lesser amount, about £600 a month, is the one that you get for 39 weeks, about 3 months longer. And that one is what you get if you're NHS, and you also get it if you're private as well. So if you're private, I think you would just get the maternity allowance from the Department of Work and Pensions. So you get your kind of just over £600 a month. But that is tax-free. It's not a lot, but it's tax-free. And the maternity pay, you pay tax on the NHS maternity leave. So that's equivalent to your earnings. So you pay superannuation and tax on that earnings.
Okay, so pretty straightforward on the face of it. Is that in any way means tested?
So no, maternity allowance is just based on the fact you've paid your NHS national insurance class 2 contributions, which as a self-employed person you will have, and then the NHS bit is based on you being active as a performer on the NHS. But there's a few little kind of stipulations for that in order to be eligible.
Right. Okay. So let's just jump straight in on those with the eligibility criteria. Is that something that you can tell us more about?
Yeah. So to be eligible, you have to have been on the performer list for 2 years. And then it says that the last 26 weeks of this has to be continuous. So you can have been in and out of work, but the last 26 weeks must be continuous. But it's really strangely worded on the NHS requirements. And I'm going to read it out because I don't think it really makes proper sense. So it says 26 weeks continuous employment before the week they are due to give birth, which makes sense so far. And then it says this period must precede the 15th week before they are due to give birth, which is two separate things. I don't think it makes any sense, but I think what they kind of mean is you give birth generally at 40 weeks. So if you take the time off that, it kind of means you just can't start that job pregnant. You can't just start to work. And then if you're pregnant at that point, having had a break, that wouldn't quite add up. So if you're already in your job, that would sort of add up if you've got your 26 weeks plus 15 weeks. It's very weirdly worded, and I don't know why it's so strange.
I'm actually,
essentially,
I might be one of the only ones, but I'm actually struggling to follow
it
that.
literally makes no sense. Like even when I write it down, I'm like, basically, you've got to already be in a job for the NHS for your pregnancy, basically. And they're really picky about it being continuous employment, because I've got quite a few people who have messaged me, and they've, in their last kind of few months of work, they've moved from one job on the Friday to starting a new job on the Monday. And because that doesn't count as continuous, because you have the weekend in between, they've lost their maternity pay because their dates aren't continuous. So It's really important to even change jobs like Tuesday and start the next one on a Wednesday, or have a nice, kind boss who can maybe make sure the dates work out for you. But you do not want to have a gap in that during your pregnancy. If you have a gap in your working for the NHS on paper, on your, on the different contracts, you can lose your maternity pay.
Okay, so
really
whilst we don't
important.
fully understand that, that's one of the take-home messages, which is to not change jobs.
You can move jobs and transition, so you could stay at one job, move to the next one, and then as long as your numbers and your dates cross over or are like Tuesday, Wednesday, but having a weekend gap is not okay in that last. And because the way they've worded it is so wishy-washy, I think it's just safe to say be super careful if you're moving jobs during your pregnancy.
I'm going to read it out here because it's in front of me. Thanks for that.
Yeah,
I'm going to read it out here because it's right in front of me to see if, well, I'll read it all out and then we'll reserve our judgment, I suppose, until after I've said it. Because then what it means is we can give all of the information that we possibly can to anybody who's listening. So 26 weeks, continuous employment before the week they are due to give birth. Okay, I get that. This period must precede the 15th week before they are due to give birth. There's where I get lost.
Yeah, I don't know what that means.
Anyway, there's more to it. Oh no, wait, sorry, no, that's it actually, my fault. So yeah, if anybody can, you know what, if anybody can interpret what that means for us, or if anybody can just break that down into understandable terms, I would be super interested to hear. However, what Sarah has just kindly done is given us some take-home actionable advice there, which will mean that we don't contravene any rules that we may or may not understand.
Yeah. I don't know if the NHS understands it, but they key the information into a computer, and they've had people say, look, I'm like, the NHS staff will be like, I'm really sorry, it won't let me process the claim. It just doesn't, it's not continuous. So it's really important.
Okay, no problem. So that's how you avoid. So that's how we avoid contravening that piece of text right there. It's just
Yeah.
basically, if you can, have some crossover or avoid changing jobs at all while you're pregnant.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because even if we don't fully understand it, if we understand what it means, then that's
Yeah.
possibly the most important.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, anything else we must know on eligibility?
I mean, very obviously, but you have to have actually stopped work
Okay.
to have the baby, and like that has to be, you know, yeah, you have to stop work. And if it does have a wording that's saying reach the 11th week before the week they're due to give birth, which I think technically, ridiculously, if your baby was premature, you wouldn't be eligible. But I don't think they've ever enforced that because, again, I think they just word things really poorly for that. One that is important probably for your listeners is that you can't be a limited company, because a limited company can't get pregnant because it's a company. So you can't be a limited company. But again, you could probably look at that and work out a way of being on the performer list for that number of years and then not being a limited company for the right amount of time to be eligible for
something
the
to think
NHS
about.
aspect.
Yeah.
And some people might be a person for their NHS activity, and then they might be for private work a limited company and all that sort of
I'm sure there's
implications
some
of
way
that.
that you could wangle
Yeah,
it. But anyway, that's basically what
and
the
you can't be an
is.
FD, because if you're an FD by definition, you haven't worked for 2 years. So your FD year is allowed to count as your 2 years employment, or not employment because we're self-employed, but that can count as 1 year. So you have to be at least a second year in. So technically you wouldn't be an FD because you're already working by that stage.
Got you. Wonderful. Thank you for that. Anything else we should know on eligibility?
I think that's the only things I know about eligibility wise. Just being super careful about the dates.
Wonderful, 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 wonderful. Okay, cool, brilliant. So let's go back, let's revert to what we were saying earlier, because what you did very concisely and very usefully from a very high level is outline the NHS maternity pay and versus standard statutory, I suppose, maternity pay.
Yeah.
Can you break down a little bit more of the ins and outs about the NHS maternity pay?
Sure.
As in how much we get, when do we get it, everything we need to know.
So the NHS maternity pay is based on your net pensionable earnings. And the important thing is it's not based on historic earnings, it's based on the figure that is put on Compass for your current year. So if I was going on maternity leave next week, the figure that would be on Compass for my projection for the year for 22-23 would be the one that would be used. So it's really important to make sure the projection is right. Normally, the projection is put on by your boss so that you get the right percentage taken off for your pension. So that if your earnings are expected to be a certain amount, you get like your 12% off for your pension or your 9% or whatever it is for the pension. The problem with this often is that your boss knows already that you're going off on maternity leave in December. So thinks, right, well, your target's this much. So you're going to earn April, May, June, July, August, September, October. And then thinks, right, well, if you're only in work for 8/12 of the year, I'm going to put 8/12 of the contract onto your estimated earnings. But actually what they need to do is put what you would get for the whole year as your estimate, because that's what your maternity pay is based on. And that is, again, a massive problem because it can be corrected quite easily, but because all too often people don't know what they should be getting in the first place, they don't know the figure. The boss puts down the figure that they've already put on Compass, and it's not necessarily the right figure, because the boss has already done their allocations of all the payments and who's going to get what percentage of the overall kind of pensionable accumulation of the whole contract. So that's a really tricky one, because often people will have the wrong value, and then instead of getting their full maternity pay, they'll get like 8/12 of it, and they won't even necessarily know, because you don't know that the figure's wrong and you need to double check it. So that's super important, to make sure it's your annual earnings as though you're not on maternity leave, which is basically, for the MPE, is your NHS pay, whatever your target is, times your UDA rate, and then taking off your lab bills. So it's the normal, and there's different ways of calculating it, but that should give you an idea of what it should be. That figure the NHS gets, and that's how they sort out your pension, but it's how they sort out your maternity. So it's super important. But the figure that you have on Compass, if you want to know how much you'll get, you're basically, if you've got the yearly figure, you get maternity pay for 26 weeks. So you get it for half a year. So if your figure up there, whatever that says, you get half of that amount, and you get it paid over 26 weeks. So you can see quite easily what your amount's going to be. But the figure on Compass gets divided by 52 to give you a weekly amount, and then it's paid in chunks. So you'll get like roughly 4 weeks at a time, and it'll be paid in the same way that your boss would pay you your normal UDAs. So it'll be the same time that you'd get that. But you can see the reports on Compass to see how much you're getting. But you can ask the NHS what your weekly figure is going to be, and that will tell you what your overall figure is going to be. But that's for 26 weeks of the maternity pay.
Right. And just purely out of curiosity, does that come from your dental practice in which you're employed?
Nope. So there's no reason for bosses to be reluctant about getting the figure right. It doesn't come from them, it comes from the NHS. The boss still gets the normal amount of money to pay the rest of, your locum or whoever's there, gets exactly the same contract, everything normal, which is why it's a bit ridiculous that people are really having to fight to get the right value, because all the boss has to do is put the correct figure on, get the maternity leave processed, and then make sure the figures are correct for the remaining members of staff. So reallocate the UDAs to whoever's doing the UDAs. But yeah, it comes from the NHS. So the boss will get the normal NHS contract value, and then they'll get the maternity payment as well, which they're meant to pass straight on to the person, and they're not meant to hold it back as you might not come back, or they're not meant to do any tinkering around with it. They're meant to pass it on to the associate or performer who's ever on maternity leave.
Do you feel, and this might be a hard question to answer, do you feel that maybe it could be the case that potentially people are not always as forthcoming as they should be with that because they think it comes out of their own pocket, or is it hard to say?
I don't know. I think lots of bosses find the whole MPE thing completely confusing anyway. So I almost think once they've bothered getting their head around what everyone's going to be getting over the next however long, and what percentage everyone's going to be in, I almost think they're just like, there's not any easy guidance. Like I tried to get a printout to be like, how do you demonstrate that they should put it up for the whole year, not just the time you're working? But they're not very forthcoming with it. They'll send like one email with some information on, but I was like, well, can I have something printed that could actually be published? I can't get any information like that from the powers that be. So but it doesn't come out of the bosses. I just think bosses are kind of confused by it, because all of pension stuff is quite hard to figure out. But it also, with the MPE thing, it's really important that everybody makes sure that their pensionable earnings are correct, because it's not only if you're going on maternity leave. Like if anybody went on long-term sick leave, it would be based on their MPE figure, what they would get on sick leave. Mm-hmm. So they would get sick leave for 26 weeks on the NHS, but you wouldn't get it for the first 4 weeks. So, and same for paternity leave. So actually loads of people need to make sure their figures are correct, because mostly people just don't really think about it, because there's nothing to think about in life. But that actually really important, because if you are on sick pay and you've got the wrong figure down on your Compass, you'll end up getting paid hardly anything for your sick pay. And that's the same for men and women.
Why do you think there would be a mismatch between the figures that they have, let's say on Exact in their practice and Compass? Are they not the same?
Well, it's not about what you're actually earning. It's about what your target is for the year. So your boss has to come up with who's going to get what, he'll be like, that person's target is that person's target is that person's target is that. The reason there's often a mismatch is that they already know, like in my case, my figure was wrong because I was going away in August. So when my boss put the information up in July, he was like, well, you're only going to earn for like 4 months of the year. So he put a really small figure up, or like 3/4 smaller than it should have been, because he was like, well, you're off on maternity leave. And I was like, yeah, but it needs to pretend I'm there the whole year to get the right figure, because your annual figure your annual income is what that's what the projections are based on.
Right, with you now. Okay, so it comes from maybe not fully understand
Yes.
somewhere along the line, someone along the line slightly misunderstands what this figure
Yeah, and it's
is
not
like.
easy to argue it, because it's really hard to find the information to say.
Oh,
Like,
right.
I've literally got a screenshot of an email that somebody sent me at NHS that I send on to other people to be like, show this to your boss. This is the NHS lady saying this is what you do. But you can't go to, like, there's a really big document, the statement of financial entitlements, which has got loads of the blurb about maternity and paternity and long-term sick, and it's just not really clear. It doesn't say on there, it just says based on your monthly earnings, but it doesn't say where they get the figure for the monthly earnings,
I'm
which
really
is the
glad we did.
NPE, but they don't say that. So
Well, I'm really glad we made this podcast. That's
yeah,
actually another whole other dimension as to why this is valuable
yeah.
then.
I
Yeah.
think it predates Compass. So because it predates Compass, it's not been updated, nobody knows.
Good stuff. That is absolute flipping gold dust. And you know what? Actually, this podcast is just as important for principals as it is associates by the sounds of it.
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely.
Wonderful. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. You touched upon this already. I wanted to know the ins and outs of taxation. I believe you said that it's not. No, no, no. It is taxed, right? Income tax.
Yeah. So your
Yeah, and this is the NHS pension, just to be clear.
NHS money, NHS maternity is taxed. It's an income, you pay tax on it, and the maternity allowance is. Now, there's a quirk about the maternity. So you get your NHS pay, which is taxed, and that's for 26 weeks. You get your maternity allowance, but actually you don't really get your maternity allowance for the first 26 weeks because it's subtracted from your NHS pay. So as an NHS person, I would get my NHS pay less each month, £600 maternity allowance. So I'd have it deducted. So my maternity allowance I get, but I also get it taken off my maternity pay. So it doesn't sound like I really get any benefit from having maternity allowance, but having it taken off my NHS pay. But it does mean that you get your maternity allowance, which is tax-free. So the only benefit you get is that £600 of the money that you get is tax-free. So you get less NHS pay, but therefore you get less tax. And then you get the tax, and then the maternity allowance carries on a bit longer. So maternity NHS is taxed, and then the maternity allowance is a separate thing, and that's tax-free. And you have to apply for both of them, because if you don't apply for both of them, the NHS just assume that you have, and then they take off £600 a month anyway. So you just have to, but you would be eligible for it. So you would apply for it, because that would be that would be stupid. So yeah, there is a little issue with the maternity allowance, which is the £156 a week sum. The issue with that is that when you apply for it, it's based on you being up to date with your class 2 national insurance contributions, which we always pay in the January and July tax return. So by definition, most of the time you're not up to date with them. So a lot of the time you'll apply for your maternity allowance, and then you'll get a letter back saying you haven't paid all your contributions. So you're only going to get £27 a week for your maternity allowance, which I don't even understand how anyone in the world could live or even pretend to live on £27 a week. I mean, I don't know how they come up with that figure, but so then they'll say you need to top up your class 2 contributions, and then it will be sorted out. So now that is generally sorted out automatically, but you'll first get a letter to say you're only going to get £27 a week, and then you'll get a bill from the HMRC to top up your class 2 contributions. So it's just paying a bit of your tax return early, and it's like 40-50 quid. It's not very much. It's only your class 2 contributions, and then that will get topped up to your £156 a week. But every time everyone gets this letter, they're always surprised, because it's a stupid quirk, because self-employed people are never up to date with their class 2 contributions, because they don't do their tax return until afterwards. But it does get sorted out. Sometimes you have to be on the phone to Department of Work and Pensions. I was on the phone to them for like 2 hours, but it was sorted out. And I have a feeling that it's sorted out a lot more quickly these days. But I did do a survey on my Facebook page about it, and 85% of the people said they had that problem. So it's really common.
Right, got you.
And ridiculous. But go on.
Definitely a quirk of the system, 100%. However, that little gem that you just gave right there is the remedy to fix it, which is awesome.
Yeah, so this is all sorted, but it's just a headache. And that's why it's quite good to apply for the maternity leave, maternity allowance as soon as you can, because then you can deal with it before you've got a screaming child. So, yeah.
Okay, awesome. Top advice. Right, cool. So, anything else that you think might be relevant or in terms of what we've just discussed? Anything else that you'd like to bring up regarding?
So just in terms of maternity pay, a lot of people don't realise that once you've had your maternity leave, you don't, like, you've earned your maternity leave by working for the NHS over the last couple of years. There's no question that you have to pay it back. Because some people are like, oh, don't you have to go back? You know, people say, oh, you have to go back and do one UDA, or you don't have to go back to work in England and Wales after you have done your maternity. So you can move jobs, you can do anything, but there's no stipulation to come back to the practice.
Mm-hmm.
There's no requirement, obviously, apart from if you've said to them whilst you're taking however long off, you need to give the notice periods. You know, you can't just disappear and not come back. But there's no obligation, because some people are really worried about perhaps deciding that they're not going to be working, you know, wanting a different job, and then they're thinking, oh, do I have to pay back my maternity pay? But there's no taking back a maternity pay. So once you've done your maternity leave, the boss can't withhold it or anything like that. I always suggest it's quite sensible, if you are going to leave your job, to have your 6 months of pay and then give you notice after that, because there's been a few cases where bosses have just been like, well, I'm not going to give you your last maternity leave then, and kind of just being a bit like, well, you're leaving, so I'm going to take your name off the contract, and if you're still not on the contract, you're not going to get maternity pay. So I always think, if your boss is not always kind of playing ball nicely with things, I just think actually give you, if you could give your notice after 6 months of money, say give your 3 months notice then, if you've said that you're going to come back at like 9 months or a year or something. Obviously it's nice to give them as much notice as possible, but if you are feeling that your boss is more likely to try and keep hold of your money, which they do sometimes, then you'll have to kind of make a judgment call on that.
Okay, yeah, food for thought. Food for thought, 100%. Anything else to round that off? Any pertinent issues you can think of?
Well, I could say, what about after having a baby? There's a couple of like things that we might not be, or people might not be aware of, like things like once you've had your baby, you can get tax-free childcare. So that's something that not everybody would know about, and that's used to be on like vouchers and things like that, which obviously when we were self-employed you wouldn't get. But as long as neither parent is on more than 100,000 or expects to be, you can get the tax-free childcare from the government, which means that you pay money in, and for every £2,000 that you pay in, I think it's per quarter, the government tops up £500.
Okay.
So that's really good, and you can do that throughout the year. Because once you get to nurseries and stuff, you're paying out like however much every month on that. But the fact that it's kind of 20% less than it might be is a nice little bonus for that. And then you can pay into that if you've got your first baby. As soon as you go back to work, you can start paying into that account, even if they're not in childcare. Actually, even if they're being looked after by grandparents, you can build up a steady account so that when they are in other forms of childcare, then you can use that money to pay for their childcare. And you can use it for like when they're at school, for like after school clubs. You can literally use it for anything, wraparound care at school. So it's a really sensible thing. But I think at the moment, loads of people don't use it who are eligible for that. So that's a really good thing, as long as you're both earning under £100,000. And then when they're born, if neither parent are earning over £60,000, then you'll be eligible for child benefit, which you can just, I don't know how much that is a week, but kind of that builds up. But the important thing with that is there's some suggestion that it's sensible to apply for that even if you're not going to take the money, because it's something to do with the child getting their national insurance number further down the line. So that's the sort of thing to kind of look on like Money Saving Expert and see whether that's a sensible thing, even if your earnings are over £60,000 for the parents. Because if they're less than that, you can build up a little pot of money at the side. But it's not a great deal, but I think it's about maybe £1,000 a year per child. So it's, better than not having it.
Good to know. Good to know.
It's not like the children become a good earning potential for quite a few years. So it's potentially a good option there. But yeah, that's obviously that's another option as well. But yeah, that's all the quirks of maternity.
Top stuff. I can tell you've done your research on this 100%. That's, you know what, that's going to be so valuable because there's tons of things that were in there that were literally, the whole point of this podcast is that you can listen to an episode and you can make more money. And within what we've just talked about just then, there's about 10 different things that any expecting family can
Mhm.
go ahead and use and implement. And I think that's absolutely awesome. Where did you get all this knowledge from? Is this just through first-hand experience, Sarah?
Yeah, I think I just was kind of trying to figure it out myself. And then I kind of was like, why is this information not clear? And then once I was trying to tell other people about it, I was like, right, I kind of actually better check what the rules are on this because, I can't be like, oh yeah, this is what I heard, but it might not even be true because that's the least useful kind of Facebook help when someone tells you something wrong. So I just kind of looked at the documents on it and then I emailed the NHS people quite a lot, but they don't I think they don't really reply to me very much anymore. So I think they're fed up with the questions. They're always like, it doesn't look like you're on maternity leave at the moment. Can you tell me what your due date is? And I'm like, well, I'm not, I'm just asking generally. So they're not quite so keen on replying because I'm going to like pin them or ask them specifics rather than a wishy-washy reply. But yeah, I just wanted to find out a bit more and kind of help people along because it's quite confusing and quite hard to figure out. Even when I explained it here, I think this really does not make any sense. But at least it hopefully makes a bit more sense to someone.
Well, this is it, and this is like when we make a podcast like this, it's important to remember that neither of us are experts per se, but
Yeah.
if zero is not knowing anything about it and 100 is knowing absolutely everything there is to know about it, if we can even get someone to 50, then that's a 50% positive gain. And that's how I
Yeah.
look at things. That's how I look at a podcast like this. So
Cool.
absolutely we want to caveat everything with the fact that yes, there's a lot of concrete stuff in there that you can go ahead and use. Even if you just use this as a reference podcast and some places to look and some things to guide the rudder on the ship during your
Yeah, sure.
voyage, during your
Yeah.
journey, then that's the purpose. And that's why I love stuff like this. And that's actually flipping Dentists Who Invest in a nutshell, really.
Mhm.
So thank you,
Yeah.
Sarah. Anything else you can think of? Any other gems?
No, I mean, I guess like if they're looking for information, then obviously via like the Facebook, the Dental Bumps maternity page is there's lots of pinned posts on that, which have kind of got the forms and the NHS things to help people out. I feel quite bad because it's very England/Wales centric because I can barely get my head around England and Wales, let alone Scotland. But there are separate groups of Scotland. Northern Ireland has its own rules. So it's complicated. But yeah, I guess point them in the direction of the Dental Bumps Facebook group because there is lots of helpful information on that.
100%. And just for total clarity, I've got the name right here. Dental Bumps Maternity Information and Support. That is the name
Yeah.
of the Facebook group.
I mean, I just thought only like 20 people were going to join it. So I didn't really think about giving it a catchy name when I set it up. And then I was like, oh, okay, well, I know I could change it, but I haven't done that. So.
Listen, Sarah, you're talking to someone who can totally empathize because I started a Facebook group as well, which is the point of this podcast, and exactly the same thing happened. So I get it. I actually changed the name recently because it basically where the group progressed to diverged away from what I'd originally planned. So just letting you know, there is a name change function on Facebook groups.
Yeah,
Just letting you know
I
it is
know,
there.
on it.
Might be worth looking at. Sarah, you've been super generous with your time today. I feel like keeping this podcast powerful, punchy, and concise actually will lend itself to being more accessible. So if you are totally happy with everything that we said, if you feel like now is a nice time to round it all off, then we can do just that.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, I think that's everything I can think of. Yeah.
Smashing. Sarah, thank you so much for being so generous with your time. We'll catch up really, really soon. See you later.
Take care. Bye.